The afternoon sky over the small city was the soft color of milk tea, and the school day had just ended. Students streamed out of the brick building with backpacks hanging low and laughter still echoing in the hallways. Among them walked a 16-year-old girl named Maya, quiet and thoughtful, with paint on her fingers from art class and a sketchbook tucked tight to her chest. She planned to stop by the corner store to buy a small pack of cookies for her little brother before heading home. Her mother worked the evening shift, so Maya often picked him up from a neighbor's place, read him a story, and helped him with homework. It was an ordinary plan for an ordinary Friday. At the end of the block stood a patrol car, windows up, lights off, parked at an angle near the bus stop. Some students did not notice it. A few did and lowered their voices. People in this neighborhood had learned how attention could follow them like a shadow. Maya did what she always did, kept her eyes forward and her steps steady. She had been raised to be careful and polite, to answer questions clearly and to keep calm even when her heart beat fast. Her choir teacher always said she had a voice like a bell. Today, she only wanted to get home before the clouds turned to rain. Near the store entrance, two boys bumped past her, and something fell from one of their bags, just a little keychain. One boy turned, thought Maya had taken it, and made a face as if to say, "Hey." She lifted her hands and shook her head, explaining it was on the ground behind them. The moment lasted only a second. The boys picked it up and walked away. But not everyone saw it that way. From the patrol car, an officer stepped out, noticed the tiny commotion, and focused on Maya. He decided, without asking first, that she was the problem to be solved. He called out to her with a firm voice, asking her to stop. Maya froze where she stood and turned around. She answered politely, "Yes, sir." She explained what had happened, that the boys dropped something and she only pointed it out. The officer's face was hard to read, his eyes did not soften. He asked for her name, her ID, and where she was going. She told him her name and that she had to pick up her brother. A few people near the bus stop slowed down. A mother with a stroller paused. A man waiting for the bus pulled out his phone, then put it away, unsure if filming would make things better or worse. The air felt heavier, like the street itself was holding its breath. The officer asked more questions and then told Maya to move toward the patrol car. She did as told, but her voice began to shake because she did not understand why this was happening. She had never been in trouble before. Her teachers would have called her responsible, a helper, the kind of student who stayed late to stack chairs after an assembly. She tried to explain again. The officer did not seem to hear her words. He guided her hands behind her back to handcuff her. She did not resist, she only asked, once, if she could call her mother. The answer was no. The metal pressed her wrists. She stared at the ground and thought of her brother waiting with his backpack at the neighbor's door. Across the street, a man named Luis, who delivered packages for a living, noticed the scene while scanning addresses on his route. He had a small habit of recording whenever he saw something that made him uneasy, not because he liked trouble but because he believed attention could protect people. He tapped his phone and began to record from a careful distance. Another bystander, a woman walking her dog, stopped and watched as well. She had a doorbell camera at home and knew how small clips could carry big truths. The neighborhood was not perfect, but its people tried to look out for each other. Today, their eyes met, and without saying a word, they understood they were now witnesses. Maya, still handcuffed, asked again if she could call her mother. This time she added, "Please." Her voice was soft and steady. The officer's words were short and direct. He told her to be quiet and stand still. She stood still. She did what he said. Her chest rose and fell in quick breaths, but she held herself together because that was who she was. A bus arrived, hissed, and opened its doors. No one boarded. The driver stood at the step and looked on, unsure whether stepping forward would help or harm. It is a sad skill to learn when to stay still, but many in that neighborhood carried that skill like a second language. The corner store owner peered out through the glass door, a towel over his shoulder, a worried crease between his brows. He knew Maya as the girl who bought juice boxes and sometimes a birthday card for a classmate. He stepped outside and tried to speak, explaining he had seen the boys drop the keychain. The officer told him to go back inside. The owner nodded and did as asked, but his hands shook when he reached for the towel again. In a quiet voice he told a customer, "This doesn't look right." The customer, an older woman with kind eyes, took out her phone and called someone she trusted, the neighbor who often watched over Maya's little brother. That neighbor answered on the second ring. As soon as she heard the words "It's Maya," she called Maya's mother at work. The mother was at a warehouse sorting packages, her hair tied in a scarf, her badge clipped to a belt loop. She listened, speechless for a moment, as the neighbor explained what was happening on the street by the bus stop. The mother's first thought was as clear as a bell: "My child is scared." She told her supervisor she had to leave. Her supervisor, who had children of her own, nodded and covered her station. The mother's hands trembled as she grabbed her bag and rushed out into the late afternoon light. Back on the sidewalk, Luis kept recording. His video showed details that might seem small but later mattered a great deal: Maya's posture, the way she kept her voice even, the distance between her and the patrol car, the other people on the sidewalk, and the time on a bus schedule in the background. Another person started recording from a different angle, catching the store window and the officer's gestures. The two angles together would later draw a clearer picture than either one alone. People talk about truth as a single line, but in moments like this, truth looks like a braid, many strands crossing, strengthening one another. Maya tried to explain again that there had been a misunderstanding. She mentioned the boys who had dropped the keychain and suggested talking to them. No one looked for them. The bus pulled away empty. A light breeze made the tree leaves flicker like small green wings. She thought about the art project in her bag, an unfinished watercolor of a bridge under a sunset sky. Her teacher had written, "You see the world with careful eyes." She wondered if careful eyes were enough in a world where conclusions could come so fast and weigh so heavy. The situation had a rhythm that everyone could feel but no one liked. The officer spoke sharply, Maya answered softly. Questions piled on the sidewalk like fallen leaves. Why was this happening? Why was she in handcuffs? Why did it feel like her words did not count? When people do not receive clear answers, silence becomes its own kind of noise. The mother in the warehouse heard that noise through a phone call, the neighbor heard it through the store window, the city would soon hear it through glowing screens. But at that moment, on that corner, it was simply a feeling in the chest that something was not fair. Then a shift happened, small but real. A young officer who had arrived later stepped a little closer, eyes moving between Maya, the recording phones, and his partner. He asked, in a steady voice, if they could slow down and review what had started this. The older officer brushed off the suggestion. The younger officer did not argue, but the thought stayed with him. He had trained to protect and to listen. He had been taught to read a situation before acting. He had also been told, in quiet tones in the locker room, that sometimes the faster voice wins. On this sidewalk, he tried to let the slower, careful voice speak. When Maya's mother reached the block, she did not run, she walked fast, because she knew sudden movements could be misread. She spoke as soon as she was close enough to be heard. Her words were simple, "That is my daughter. Please, tell me what happened." She did not raise her voice. She did not point. She kept her hands where everyone could see them. Years of quiet strength guided her, the kind learned from holding a baby with a fever, from working a double shift, from paying rent on time even when numbers did not add up easily. She walked straight to her child and looked into her eyes, and in that glance Maya felt anchored again. The street seemed to lean in as the mother asked for an explanation. The officer gave a short answer about suspicious behavior, which did not match what witnesses had seen. The store owner stepped out again and, in a calm tone, spoke up. The woman with the dog added what she had observed. Luis kept filming, steady as a tripod. The young officer finally said they should check the camera on the store doorway because it might show how the moment began. The older officer hesitated. The mother caught that hesitation and held onto it like a handle. "Please," she said, "let's look." Her voice did not shake. After a pause that felt like a long minute, the older officer agreed to review the store video. The handcuffs stayed on for the time being, but there was a new care in the air, as if the street itself had insisted on a deep breath. The group moved slowly toward the store entrance. The neighbor arrived just then, breathless but calm, and placed a gentle hand on the mother's shoulder. The young officer nodded to the store owner, who led them to the small screen mounted behind the counter. People on the sidewalk did not crowd the door, they stayed back and watched, the way you watch a door to a room where something important is being decided. What the video would show and how it would travel from this corner to homes and offices across the city belonged to the next chapter. For now, part 1 ended with a truth that anyone could see: a teenager stood in handcuffs after a misunderstanding, a mother stood with her, and a neighborhood stood watch. Phones were recording, not to chase trouble, but to hold a light steady. In that quiet, before the rain finally touched the sidewalk, you could almost hear the city deciding what kind of story it would allow itself to be. The store's back room was small, with a humming fridge and a narrow counter where receipts curled like little paper snakes. On the wall, a screen showed the doorway camera, a clear view of the sidewalk minutes before everything changed. The owner, hands still shaking, rewound the footage. Everyone leaned in just enough to see, giving each other space. On the video, the two boys rushed past, the keychain slipped out, and Maya pointed at it with an open palm. There was no shout, no grab, no push, only a quick moment of kindness and confusion. The young officer watched the screen, then watched his partner's face, and then looked back again, as if measuring a bridge he might need to cross. The older officer stood with arms tied across his chest. The evidence did not bend to the story he had told himself. The mother looked between the screen and her daughter's eyes. She said nothing for several seconds because the truth did not need decoration. At last, the owner saved the clip onto a thumb drive. Luis, the delivery driver, said he would email his video, too. The younger officer cleared his throat and asked, respectfully but firmly, if they could remove the handcuffs. The older officer hesitated again. The young officer spoke once more, softer this time, reminding everyone in the room that the footage showed no wrongdoing. Slowly, like someone opening a heavy door, the older officer reached for the cuffs and unlocked them. On the sidewalk, air seemed to return to the block in one big breath. Maya rubbed her wrists and nodded a thank you to the people who had stayed. The bus driver, who had been waiting nearby, called dispatch to say he would be delayed and then stepped out to ask if anyone needed a ride later. The woman with the dog handed Maya a small bottle of water. The mother, now holding her daughter, asked for a copy of the store video and the officers' names. She wrote them down with steady letters. She did not want any argument, only a record of what had happened and who had been there. The older officer announced he would be filing a report and left in his patrol car. The young officer stayed to answer questions from the mother and the store owner. He spoke carefully, as if words were tools that could fix or break things. News moves in odd ways, sometimes like a mountain, slow and heavy, and sometimes like a leaf on wind. This day, it moved like wind. By evening, the short clips from Luis and another neighbor were on phones throughout the neighborhood. The videos did not show everything, no picture ever does, but they showed enough: a girl in handcuffs, calm and respectful, a crowd keeping distance but paying attention, an officer whose tone was harder than the moment required. The videos were not posted with angry captions. They were posted with questions: why? Who will explain this? What if there were no cameras? At the station, as the sun lowered and turned the city gold, the department's communications office prepared a short statement. It said an incident had occurred near a bus stop, that a subject had been detained and then released, and that standard review procedures would follow. It did not mention the store video. It did not mention the bystanders. It did not mention the mother's careful voice. People reading the statement felt it was like a coat hung over a chair, it covered the shape but not the person. Comments began to appear online, polite but direct, asking for clarity and for a timeline of what would happen next. That night, the mother set a plate on the kitchen table for Maya and another for her little brother, who listened wide-eyed. They ate slowly. The radio was on low, playing old songs that usually warmed the room, but the house felt like it had new walls, thin ones that other people could hear through. The neighbor who had made the first call stopped by with a small basket of oranges and a promise to pick up the brother from school if needed. The mother thanked her and promised to keep her updated. After the dishes were done, Maya took out her sketchbook. Her hands still trembled, but drawing helped her breathe. She sketched a bridge again, this time adding people standing on it, each a simple outline, each holding a small light. The next morning, the city woke with the memory of the videos. A community group that met every Saturday at the library decided to hold a gathering outside the station that afternoon. They did not want shouting or chaos. They wanted presence, signs with short messages, a few speakers, a request for fair treatment. They called it a listening line and invited neighbors to stand quietly with them for 1 hour. The store owner printed the words "We saw what we saw" and taped the page to his window. The bus driver told other drivers about the plan, and some said they would stop by on their breaks. The young officer, seeing the event posted online, closed his phone and sat with the feeling that keeps honest people awake. He knew he had a choice to make about what he would say if asked. By midday, local reporters were calling the department. They had seen the clips and wanted an interview. The department announced that Internal Affairs would review the incident and that the officer involved had been placed on administrative leave during the review. For many, the term sounded like a pause button. Some felt relief that a process existed, others felt tired because they had heard those words before. The difference this time was the clarity of the footage and the calm of the witnesses. There were no raised voices on the videos, only steady ones. There was no confusion in the store camera about how the scene began. It was harder to paint the day as a blur when so many details were sharp. When the listening line formed, the street in front of the station looked gentle and firm at once. People held signs that said "Dignity, protect our kids, and fairness is a policy too." A choir teacher from Maya's school arrived and, without fanfare, began a soft hum that others joined. The sound rose and fell like breathing. The mother stood among them, not at the front but not hidden either. She spoke briefly into a small microphone, describing what happened in a few sentences. She did not insult anyone. She did not list 1,000 past hurts. She said she loved the city, that she worked hard here, that her daughter was kind and careful, and that what happened on the sidewalk was wrong. Then she folded her notes and stepped back, letting the next person speak. A council member came, as did the superintendent of schools. The superintendent promised counselors would be available for students who needed to talk. The council member said he would push for a clearer use of force policy and better training on how to slow down tense moments. He also said, very plainly, that when a person is in handcuffs, they are not a threat in the same way, and officers must account for that. Reporters took notes. The young officer watched from the steps, not in uniform. He felt the words as a weight and also as a direction. Behind him, in the building, Internal Affairs logged the first set of witness names, including his own. The next wave of attention came when a second angle surfaced, a doorbell camera from the building next to the bus stop. The homeowner had been out of town and shared the clip after seeing the neighborhood posts. The second angle matched the others and added a wider frame, the space between people, the lack of any sudden move, the posture of a crowd that wanted peace. It showed, too, the moment the young officer glanced at his partner, opened his mouth, and then closed it. The clip went to a local journalist who included it in a calm, careful story. The headline did not accuse, it asked, "What do we do with what we saw?" In the days that followed, records public ones revealed that the older officer had been the subject of earlier complaints, none of which had led to discipline stronger than a note or a short suspension. The timeline was not long, but it was there, like faint marks on a wall where pictures had once hung. People did not need to shout to make the point that patterns matter. The department, under pressure but also under its own duty, promised a complete review of past incidents connected to the officer and an external expert to examine training gaps. The chief spoke at a press conference and said, with visible effort, that the uniform must never be a shield for cruel behavior, and that the badge is a promise to serve, not a license to control. At school, teachers checked in on Maya without making her the lesson. Some of her classmates wrote small notes on sticky paper and slipped them into her locker: "We love you, we're with you, you're brave." The art teacher gave her a small set of new brushes and told her to take her time. After school, kids gathered in small circles to talk about what they had seen. They said out loud what they often kept inside, that it is hard to be young and know both how to be careful and how to be free. A counselor explained the steps of a complaint, the meaning of due process, and the difference between anger that burns everything and anger that lights the way. It was a quiet kind of learning, the kind that helps a city grow up. Meanwhile, the family met with a civil rights attorney who sat with them at the kitchen table, not in a big office. He explained each step in plain words: the internal review, the possibility of criminal charges, the role of witnesses, the need to keep all videos safe, the timeline for a civil claim if they chose to file one. He said there would be days when people tried to twist the story. He promised to keep the focus on facts. He also reminded Maya to keep doing her homework, to sleep when she could, and to find moments of normal life, because cases can take time, and the heart needs steady rhythms. The mother listened and took notes. She was tired, but her eyes were bright. She wanted fairness, nothing more and nothing less. In the evenings, as the city talked and planned and weighed its choices, the young officer wrote in a notebook. He listed everything he remembered, then everything he wished he had done, and then what he could do now. He called internal affairs and offered a statement. He told a mentor at the academy that he wanted to learn how to speak up better, earlier, even when it was hard. He did not sleep well, but when he did, he dreamed of the store camera's tiny screen and how small images can hold giant truths. He knew the next chapters would pull louder voices into the room: lawyers, officials, experts, and he hoped that the quiet voices would not be lost. By the end of the week, the city had changed in ways that were visible and invisible. Visible were the signs on the station fence asking for transparency. Visible were the news vans, the town hall announcements, the official memos. Invisible was the way people looked at each other on the sidewalk, a little longer, a little more carefully. Invisible was the new question they carried: what will I do if I see something like that again? Some decided to learn the basics of recording respectfully. Some decided to attend the next council meeting. Some simply decided to greet their neighbors by name and mean it. All of it mattered. All of it added up to a kind of steady pressure that is not angry for the sake of anger but firm for the sake of what is right. And through it all, Maya returned to her sketchbook. The bridge in her drawing now had lanterns along the rail. Each lantern glowed, and each glow touched the next. She was not trying to make a grand statement. She was simply drawing what she had seen, that on an ordinary block, ordinary people had stood together and kept their light steady until someone in power had to look. The story was not over. But the city had already answered at least one question: when the wind carried news, they chose to meet it with open eyes and steady hands. The week after the listening line, the city felt different, like a house where someone had opened a window and promised to leave it open. Internal Affairs began calling witnesses one by one. The store owner brought in his thumb drive and signed a paper that said the video was the same as the day it was saved. Luis came with a neat folder, his phone clip, the email he sent to himself as a backup, the exact time stamps. The woman with the dog printed still frames to show how far Maya stood from the patrol car the entire time. The young officer arrived in plain clothes and sat with a quiet, careful look, as if he knew every word could shift the weight of the day. At the same time, the district attorney's office opened a case file. A victim advocate met Maya and her mother at a simple office with a kind sofa and a bowl of mints on the table. The advocate explained the steps, how evidence is reviewed, how decisions are made, what beyond a reasonable doubt means. She spoke slowly and invited questions. Maya's mother asked if her daughter would need to speak in front of a large room. The advocate said maybe, but not yet, and promised to stand with them if that day came. She also arranged for a gentle checkup at a clinic so a medical professional could record any marks from the cuffs and note how Maya felt that night. The report was plain and respectful. It did not sensationalize. It simply recorded what a careful eye saw. Back at the station, technicians pulled the officer's body camera footage and the audio from his microphone. The recordings were clearer than anyone expected. They caught the moment the boys dropped the keychain, the calm tone of Maya's answers, and the short, sharp commands that followed. They also captured something that would matter later, the young officer saying, "Can we slow this down?" Quiet but audible. The older officer answered in a way that said he was not open to slowing down. The older officer's written report from that day did not match those sounds. Details he had described as resistance were not visible on video. Movements he had called threatening looked like a teenager standing still, asking to call her mother. The district attorney met with senior prosecutors in a room with a long table and a wall of windows. They went frame by frame, then minute by minute, and then zoomed out to the larger picture, a handcuffed teen, a crowd watching, a set of choices made in seconds that left a family shaken and a city awake. They considered what charges might fit the facts and the law. The lead prosecutor, a person known for clear thinking and calm speech, reminded the room that the goal was not to win a headline but to seek justice in a way that could stand. They listed options on a whiteboard, erased half, listed again, and settled on a path that balanced accountability and fairness. A grand jury was convened to hear evidence. Witnesses were called in small groups so they would not shape each other's memories. The store owner spoke first, voice steady. The bus driver described what he saw from the curb. The woman with the dog explained why she began recording and where she stood. The victim advocate sat with Maya and her mother in a nearby room while they waited for their turn. Maya folded and unfolded the corner of a paper towel, then put it down and held her mother's hand instead. When it was time, she told the panel what she remembered in simple words. She did not add opinions. She answered questions and asked for a short break when her throat tightened. The room gave her that break. The young officer was the witness people quietly wondered about. He had been on the sidewalk, close enough to hear and see details. He had also been in the patrol car during training, close enough to know the culture that could sometimes discourage speaking up. He sat before the panel with palms flat on the table. He told them what the video already showed and what it did not, the tone of the older officer before the first command, the quick decision to use cuffs, the feeling in the air when someone chooses control over understanding. He admitted he had not intervened quickly enough. He said it out loud, not to cover himself but to tell the truth. He also said he did speak up and that it mattered later. The panel listened the way a city listens when it is ready to grow. Outside the courthouse, there were no fireworks, only a gray sky that looked like it might rain and a line of quiet people waiting on regular business. News of the grand jury's decision came a day later. The older officer was indicted on charges related to unlawful force and official misconduct. The announcement was careful. It explained that an indictment is not a conviction but a formal step that means there is enough evidence to proceed to trial. The district attorney stressed that the law applies to every person, and that while uniforms deserve respect, they do not place anyone above rules meant to protect the public. The city exhaled again, but this time the breath came with a new feeling, momentum. The officer turned himself in at the county facility. Paperwork was processed. Conditions were set for release while the case moved forward: no contact with the family, surrender of any equipment, regular check-ins. The Officers Association released a statement about due process and reminded everyone not to rush to judgment. Some people bristled, others agreed. The mother read the statement and said to her friend, "We are not rushing. We are walking one step at a time." She had learned that patience is not passive. It can be the strongest stance in the room when backed by facts and a community that refuses to look away. Pre-trial hearings came next. Defense attorneys filed motions to exclude the videos, arguing they were incomplete. Prosecutors responded that multiple angles gave a fuller view and that the store footage could be authenticated by the owner. The judge, a careful person who had once taught a class called How to Listen, held a hearing to test each claim. The store owner explained where the camera was, how often he checked it, and how he saved the file. A technician from the department described the chain of custody for the body camera data. The judge asked short, precise questions and then ruled the videos would be allowed, with instructions to the jury about what they did and did not show. The courtroom felt like a scale had tipped toward balance. In the evenings, Maya tried to hold on to her normal life. She drew, studied for a biology quiz, and called her grandmother to talk about everyday things like recipes and a neighbor's cat. At school, she joined the art club for a mural in a hallway that needed color. The design showed a long path with lanterns, and students painted one small lantern each. The choir teacher asked if she wanted to sing in the spring program, and she said yes, because singing made her breath steady. She was not trying to be a symbol. She was trying to be a teenager who had been through something hard and was healing in tiny steps that mattered. Her family's attorney built a timeline on a big board in the dining room. He added sticky notes for each piece of evidence and each witness. He practiced questions in a calm voice, never pushing, always inviting clear answers. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you do? He reminded everyone that the goal was not to defeat anyone, but to shine light where it had been dim and to set a standard that would protect the next person. He also set boundaries around the house, times to talk about the case, and times to talk about school, dinners, and weekend plans. The case was important. Life was important too. The young officer met with his mentor from the academy. They sat on a park bench beneath a tree that dropped small seeds on their shoes. He spoke about the day and the silence he carried in his first seconds on the sidewalk. He spoke about the choice to tell the truth and the cost that might come with it. The mentor nodded and said something simple that stayed with him: courage is doing your job when it is hardest. The young officer wrote that sentence in his notebook and, later, asked Internal Affairs to add a statement to the file about what he wished he had done differently and how training could help officers slow down in similar moments. He was not trying to be praised. He was trying to be useful. A local journalist produced a long, careful story about the duty to intervene, explaining that many departments now teach officers to step in when a colleague is losing judgment, and to speak up sooner rather than later. The story did not use sharp words. It used plain ones. It showed examples where a steady voice had changed the outcome, and it asked readers to imagine a culture where such voices were not rare. People shared the story with notes like, "This is how we make it better." The chief announced a review of training and a plan to add role-play sessions that focus on slowing down, listening, and recognizing when a person in cuffs is vulnerable and must be protected. In a small church not far from the bus stop, a weekend meeting brought together families, teachers, officers, and city staff. They passed a microphone in a circle. People told short stories, a parent describing a traffic stop that went fine because the officer explained each step, a teacher describing a hallway conflict that calmed when a student felt heard, a retiree describing a neighborhood watch that learned to call for help without making hasty claims. When Maya's mother's turn came, she spoke about gratitude for the neighbors who stayed, the advocate who listened, and the young officer who told the truth. She also said she wanted her daughter to live in a place where carefulness and freedom could walk side by side. The turning point became clear not because of one loud moment, but because many quiet choices lined up. Witnesses kept their clips safe, a store owner saved a file, an advocate made time, a prosecutor asked good questions, a judge held a fair line, a young officer chose honesty, a community chose steadiness over noise. Together, those choices moved the case from confusion to clarity. The older officer would stand trial. The city would watch, not with harshness for its own sake, but with a promise to keep the window open and let the light in. On the night the trial date was set, rain finally came. It tapped the roofs and ran down the gutters and made the sidewalks shine. Maya stood by the window and watched the street lights turn the wet road into a ribbon. She felt the old fear like a cold shadow at her back, but she also felt something new in front of her, warm and steady, like the lanterns in her drawing. The path was long and would not be simple, but she had seen enough good hands to believe the bridge could hold. She closed the curtains, put her brushes in a cup, and went to sleep knowing the next part of the story belonged to a room where truth would be tested and, if cared for, would stand. The trial began on a cool morning with a pale sky and a line of people outside the courthouse. Some were family members, some neighbors, and some were just citizens who wanted to see the process with their own eyes. Inside, the courtroom felt careful and calm. A clock ticked softly above the judge's bench, and the state flag hung without a ripple. The jurors took their seats, ordinary people from different parts of the city, each holding a small notebook and a pencil. They had promised to listen closely and decide only on facts and the law. The judge opened by reminding everyone that a courtroom is a place for patience and truth. There would be no loud reactions, no gestures meant to sway anyone. Only evidence would speak. The prosecutor stood first. Their voice was even and steady. They told a simple story, a teenager who was calm, a set of instructions that could have slowed things down, and choices by an older officer that did not match policy, training, or basic fairness. They said the videos would show what words sometimes blur: distance, posture, tone, and time. Then they asked the jurors to watch closely. The defense gave their opening next. They asked the jury to remember that work on the street can be stressful and that judgment calls are not always clear in the moment. They said the videos might not show every angle and that the older officer believed he was addressing a problem. They asked the jury not to rush and to measure everything by the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense did not raise their voice. They used careful phrases and asked for patience too. The first witnesses were people the city already knew. The store owner took the stand. He described the doorway camera and how he saved the clip right after the incident. He answered every question with small, solid details: how often he checks the camera, how he labels files, where the thumb drive stayed before he turned it over. He did not add commentary. He did not guess. He stood on what he saw. The prosecutor played the store video, and the room watched in quiet. The clip was short and clear: the two boys passing, the keychain falling, Maya pointing it out, and then the interaction by the patrol car. No one spoke until it ended. The woman who had been walking her dog testified next. She explained where she stood and why she started recording. She spoke about keeping enough distance to avoid blocking anyone while still capturing what was happening. The bus driver followed and described his view from the curb. His words were plain: he saw a teen in handcuffs, standing still, asking to call her mother, and he saw a tone from the older officer that felt too hard for the situation. None of the witnesses tried to make speeches. They each offered clear pieces of a larger picture. Then came the body camera footage. A technician from the department explained the chain of custody, who handled the data and how it was preserved. When the video played, the room leaned forward almost without meaning to. The audio caught the small sounds of a city block, a bus hiss, a door chime, shoes on pavement. It also caught voices. It captured Maya's soft answers and a brief sentence from the younger officer, "Can we slow this down?" The defense asked to pause and replay a few moments. The judge allowed it. The jurors took notes every time the playback stopped. A doctor from a neighborhood clinic testified about the checkup that followed. They spoke in gentle terms about wrist marks and tension headaches, nothing dramatic, just careful notes from a careful exam. They explained that stress can live in the body like a tight fist and that calm, steady support helps it release. The prosecutor did not ask for more than the facts, and the doctor offered only what they had recorded. When Maya took the stand, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. She sat straight, spoke in a clear voice, and answered every question with simple words. She recounted the day, leaving school, the corner store, the two boys, the keychain, the request to call her mother. She did not label anyone. She did not assign motives. She told what she did and what she heard. When the defense asked their questions, they stayed respectful. They wondered if her memory could be mistaken on one or two details. Maya listened, thought, and answered without defensiveness, "I might not remember the exact second, but I remember asking to call my mother, and I remember being told no." The jury wrote that down. The mother testified briefly too. She described the phone call from the neighbor and the walk to the block where her daughter stood. She said she kept her voice steady on purpose. She said it was the hardest calm she had ever made. She did not cry while she spoke, not because she felt nothing, but because she wanted every word to land. Before she stepped down, she thanked the court for treating her daughter with dignity during the process. An expert in police training provided context the jury needed. He had taught use of force policy for years and had no role in the department's current training. He explained what officers are taught about scaling their response to what they face, about reading a person's posture, and about the special duty of care when someone is in handcuffs. He talked about time, distance, and cover, and how creating even a small pause can change an outcome. He said the videos showed options the older officer could have used: speak slower, allow a call to a guardian, verify the store owner's account sooner. The defense asked whether experts can disagree. The expert agreed they can, but said the core standards are widely shared and clear. When it was the older officer's turn, he chose to testify. He spoke about his years on the job and about the pressure of making quick decisions. He said he thought the situation might become unsafe and that he felt urgency. The prosecutor kept a steady pace on cross-examination, asking about specific moments from the video and from his report. They asked why his written words described resistance when the footage showed stillness. They asked why he did not accept the store owner's offer to explain. They asked why he refused the call to a guardian. The older officer's answers grew shorter. The jurors kept writing. The young officer testified last for the state. He sat with shoulders set and hands still. He described the sidewalk, the commands, and the moment he said, "Can we slow this down?" He admitted he should have said more, faster, and that he has thought about that every day since. He said he came forward because doing nothing would have been worse. On cross, the defense asked if he was trying to protect himself. He said no, and his voice did not shake when he said it. Closing arguments felt like the last stones placed on a patient path. The prosecutor spoke about the small, plain truths that matched across witnesses and videos: Maya's calm, the bystander's steady distance, the repeated denial of a simple request, and the decision to escalate without cause. They reminded the jury that a badge is a promise, not a shield, and that the law does not bend for uniforms. The defense asked the jury to consider the stress of the moment and to see doubt in the places where the videos were quiet or the angles were narrow. They asked the jurors to remember that people can misread a situation without ill will. Then both sides sat down, and the judge gave instructions: weigh the evidence, apply the law, and decide together. Deliberations took time. The jury asked to replay the body camera audio and the store video. They asked for a readback of the expert's explanation of handcuff standards. They looked at a simple timeline the court clerk had marked: keychain falls, first question, handcuffs, request to call mother, suggestion to check the store, delay, release. The jurors spoke quietly to one another, making sure each person had room to speak. When they returned, the courtroom rose. The clerk read the verdicts. On the most serious count, unlawful use of force against a restrained person, the jury found the older officer guilty. On a second count related to official misconduct, they found him guilty as well. On a lesser count that required a threshold of intent the jurors were not all sure about, they returned not guilty. The judge thanked the jury for their care. There were no cheers, no gasps, only a soft sound that might have been relief releasing from many chests at once. Sentencing took place a few weeks later. In the meantime, both sides submitted memoranda. The state listed aggravating factors: the youth of the victim, the restraints, the abuse of authority. The defense listed mitigating points: years of service, community letters, and willingness to follow court orders. The courtroom was full again when the judge returned to the bench for the decision. Before announcing the sentence, the judge spoke with a tone that felt both firm and humane. They said this case was not about dislike of police, it was about the rule that no one may use authority to harm. They noted the videos, the consistency of witnesses, and the duty officers owe to handcuffed people. They also acknowledged the older officers' years of work, then said service can never cancel accountability. The judge announced a prison term that fell within the guidelines, not the maximum and not the minimum. The sentence included time in custody, followed by supervised release, a bar from future law enforcement employment, required training on ethics and de-escalation if he ever sought any public safety role, and restitution for counseling costs. The judge also recommended that the department review its early warning systems for repeated complaints. When the gavel touched wood, the room stayed quiet. Maya held her mother's hand. The older officer nodded once without speaking as deputies stepped forward. The young officer looked down at his notebook and closed it. Outside, cameras waited, but the voices remained measured. The family's attorney thanked the court for a fair process and thanked the community for keeping calm and focused. The mother spoke briefly. She said she was grateful for every person who told the truth and for a city that proved it could protect a child with facts, not noise. She said her daughter would keep studying, keep drawing, and keep singing, because the best answer to hurt is a life that continues with dignity. Then they left without long statements. That afternoon, the department released a plan with dates and steps. It included more training time on slowing down fast moments, a clear duty to intervene rule with real consequences, and a faster system for releasing body camera footage when possible. The chief said, "We will learn from this." The council scheduled a hearing to make the changes part of written policy, not just promises. A small fund began to support youth-led projects on rights and responsibilities. At school, the art club finished the hallway mural, a long path with lanterns glowing at even spaces. Students stood in front of it, pointing out the small marks they had painted themselves. The choir teacher pinned up the spring program list and wrote next to Maya's name, "Solo if she wants it." She smiled and wrote, "Yes." That evening, Maya opened her sketchbook again. She drew a pair of scales on a simple table. On one side, she placed a small video camera. On the other, she drew a steady hand. The scale balanced. She shaded the background lightly, then added a bridge in the distance with lanterns, the same bridge she had been drawing all along. She did not write any caption. She did not need to. The picture held a truth the whole city had felt: when many ordinary people act with care, saving a clip, telling what they saw, asking the right questions, justice can move forward without shouting. The trial was done. The sentence was set. The next part would be about what the city did with what it had learned. Spring arrived with soft rain and bright leaves, and the city felt like a room that had been cleaned and aired out. The courthouse steps were quiet now. People had gone back to their jobs and schools, but the story did not fade. It turned into work, small, steady, everyday work. The council met again and again, not for speeches but for votes. They wrote the training plan into policy and added a simple rule at the top: when a person is in handcuffs, officers must treat them as protected, not as a threat. They added a second rule many had asked for, a clear duty to intervene, with steps and deadlines, so that the next young officer would have both permission and responsibility to speak up early. At the station, a message went out with dates, instructors, and a checklist. Every officer would complete slow-down sessions, role-play scenes that practiced the pause, the calm voice, the quick check with a guardian, and the habit of asking one more question before making a big choice. The chief announced an early warning system that would flag a pattern of complaints sooner. The system was not a secret. The department promised to publish numbers each quarter: stops, handcuff use, force reports, and outcomes. People did not cheer, they wrote the dates on their calendars. Trust, they knew, is not a gift. It is a schedule you keep. The neighborhood started its own schedule. On the first Saturday of every month, the library hosted listening hours. The room was simple: chairs in a circle, a pot of tea, a stack of clipboards. People took turns. A parent spoke about a curfew that felt confusing. A teen described how it helps when an officer says why they are asking a question. A retired nurse explained how stress shows on a face and how a few calm words can lower it. Sometimes officers came in uniform. Sometimes they came in plain clothes. Everyone was asked to use short sentences and to leave room for the next voice. The sessions were not perfect, but they were steady. Steady things change places. The store owner replaced his old camera with a better one after a small grant from a neighborhood safety fund that had formed during the case. He hung a modest sign on the door: "We look out for each other here." He also placed a one-page handout on the counter titled "How to Record Respectfully." It said, "Stand at a safe distance, do not block anyone, speak calmly if spoken to, and share your clip with someone you trust so there is a backup." He did not want to turn his store into a stage. He wanted it to stay what it had always been: a place to pick up milk, bread, and the sense that you are not alone. Luis, the delivery driver, returned to his roots, but now he kept a small notebook next to his phone. On the first page he wrote the times and addresses where he had seen the city at its best: a crossing guard walking a nervous kindergartner across the street, a bus driver waiting an extra moment for an elderly man to sit down, a cashier using kind eyes to help a teen count change. He started sending the little notes to a community newsletter. People began to look forward to Good Minutes, a column with simple lines about kindness that did not make the news but made the day. The woman with the dog kept walking her gentle, gray-muzzled friend at the same time each afternoon. Neighbors started saying hello more often. Small connections grew: a wave from a porch, a shared umbrella at a bus stop, a brief laugh about the weather. She did not think of herself as a hero. She thought of herself as a neighbor who had stayed, and who would stay again if needed. She joined the library circle and sometimes brought a bag of dog treats for the kids who liked to pet her companion after the meeting. At school, the mural with lanterns became a landmark. New students asked about it. Older students told the story without drama. They said, "We made this after a hard time. We wanted the hallway to feel safe." Teachers used the mural as a starting point for projects on civic life: how public records work, what a fair process looks like, how to write a clear letter to an official. Once a month, the art teacher opened the room for bridge nights, where anyone could paint, sketch, or simply sit and listen to soft songs. Maya often came and worked quietly at the long table by the window. Maya's life did not become a parade. It became a path. She kept up with her classes and sang a solo at the spring program because singing helped her breathe from her belly. The song was simple and warm, and when it ended the room held a long, gentle silence before the clapping. She met with a counselor who helped her name and unknot the fear that sometimes returned when she heard a sharp voice behind her. She learned to notice her own body's alarm and to ease it with steady breaths, a walk, or a page of drawing. The restitution ordered by the court covered her counseling bills, and the city quietly added a small fund for students who needed similar help after stressful events. It was not a favor. It was a duty done well. Her little brother felt safer too. The neighbor kept her promise to help with pickups when needed. He loved the library circle because at the end someone always read a short story. He drew his own tiny lantern on the last page of the meeting notes and wrote his name next to it with careful letters. He told his teacher that a city is like a big school, you have to learn each other to be kind to each other. The teacher smiled and wrote the sentence on the board the next morning. The young officer stayed on the job but not on the same path. He asked to work with new recruits and focused on the first weeks, when habits are as soft as clay. He practiced the pause with them. He told the truth about the day outside the store and the sentence that still lived in his head, "Can we slow this down?" He said it earlier now, and louder when needed. He also learned to say, "I need a second voice," when he felt tension rising. He did not present himself as perfect. He presented himself as a person who had chosen better and was teaching others how to choose better too. The department's reports began to show changes that were small but real. There were fewer complaints about rough tones. There were more notes about calls to guardians when a minor was involved. The body camera release timeline got shorter. A small oversight group, which included a youth representative, a teacher, a bus driver, and a clerk from a grocery store, met each quarter to read the numbers and ask questions in plain language. They were not famous people. They were careful people. Their presence at the table mattered more than any press conference. The officer who had been convicted served his sentence. He filed no public letters and gave no interviews. The judge's words about duty and restraint stayed on the record, where they belong. The city did not parade his name. It kept to the principle that had guided the case: accountability is not a story about one person, it is a promise about all people. The promise is that authority must be bounded by care, and that care must include the most basic kindness: listening when someone says, "Please, can I call my mother?" A quiet fund in Maya's name was created at the high school, not to build a statue but to buy small things that make students feel seen: art supplies, choir binders, a bus pass for a teen who needed to get home safely after practice, a scholarship for a student who wrote about dignity in action. The first recipient was a shy sophomore who had helped a classmate with a speech impediment present in front of the class. He used the scholarship to attend a summer writing program at the library. He came back in the fall with new words for old hopes. One evening, almost a year after the trial, the library hosted a lantern walk. Families and officers walked together from the mural to the store, then to the bus stop, and back to the library. Each person carried a small paper lantern with a short message written on it: "Ask first. Speak slow. Look again. I'm listening." Maya walked between her mother and the young officer's mentor from the academy. The air was soft, and the street lights seemed to nod as they passed. There were no chants, no speeches, just footsteps and soft conversation. At the end, they set the lanterns on a long table and took turns reading a few out loud. The messages sounded like a poem made by many hands. In their home, Maya and her mother grew comfortable with the quiet again. They cooked on Sundays and kept a plant on the kitchen windowsill that reached for the sun and then reached again the next day. Sometimes the mother would stop and look at her daughter's newest drawing, a bridge, yes, but now with people walking both ways, some wearing uniforms, some wearing backpacks, all with their faces turned toward one another, not away. The mother would touch the edge of the paper and say, "We kept going." It was a simple sentence. It was enough. The lesson of the city was not that trouble would never come back. Trouble visits every place. The lesson was that when it arrives, you can meet it with calm eyes, clear voices, and hands that hold the record steady. You can build habits that do not depend on any one person's goodness but on shared rules and shared courage. You can teach children that freedom and carefulness are friends, not enemies. You can remind officers that the strongest thing they can do is to pause. You can remind neighbors that the strongest thing they can do is to stay. On a bright morning in early summer, Maya stood at the edge of a park where the art club was helping paint a new crosswalk with colorful stripes. Cars slowed. Kids pointed. The bus driver honked a friendly honk, the kind that sounds like a smile. The young officer parked nearby and stepped out to direct traffic while the paint dried. He raised a hand in greeting and then lowered it to let a car pass. Maya dipped her brush in a small tray and drew another clean line. The line met the next line. Together, they made a safe path. That is how the city moved forward, line by line, rule by rule, habit by habit, light by light. Not with a rush that fades, but with a rhythm that holds. The videos had told a hard truth, and the court had answered with a firm one. The people did the rest. When someone asked, months later, whether the place had changed, a neighbor answered, "Yes, and we keep changing. We plan to keep the window open." And if you stood on that sidewalk at dusk, you could see it, small lanterns, steady hands, and a bridge strong enough for everyone.